This webinar will look at NHS and industry leaders sharing their experience and answering questions about AI for the NHS. So we will hear from speakers with frontline experience of forging relationships between the NHS, academia and industries, overcoming hurdles around data access and developing successful AI tools on the ground. So now I'm going to hand over to our first presenter, Eleanor Tancliffe from Hill Dickinson. Thank you.
Hi, thanks, Fran. Hi, everyone. I'm just going to be chairing today's session. My name is Eleanor Tancliffe. I'm a data protection lawyer. I'm really excited to be chairing this session because it just combines a couple of subjects that I find fascinating. So firstly, the NHS and how it's doing at the moment, obviously hugely challenging times and how we overcome those. And secondly, the AI, the ethics of AI and how we can get it to do what we want it to do. All sorts of interesting questions around that our speakers are going to touch upon. Just so you know how the session's going to flow, each of our speakers is going to talk for about 10 minutes. We'll have a little pause at the end of each talk, just so that if you've got any questions that are particular to that talk, so if you want the speaker to clarify something or elaborate on something, we'll pick those questions up then. And then we'll have a final, more general Q&A session at the end, so you can ask anything you want and our speakers can pitch in as they wish to. But without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Nev from the Academic Health Sciences Network.
Thanks, Eleanor. I'm going to just attempt to share my screen, and I hope you can all see that. And I think that's okay. So welcome, everybody. I'm Nev Young. I work at the Academic Health Science Network here in Yorkshire and Humber. There are 15 AHSNs covering the whole of England. And all of them have a commercial director. So there are 15 of me. So I guess in a sense, I'm cloned. That feels like yesterday's technology. We're going to talk about tomorrow's, which is AI. And I'm going to try and give you a perspective from an AHSN. Now, what does that mean? What's the perspective from an AHSN? What does that really mean? Well, we are in effect the innovation arm of the NHS. At least that's what we like to think about ourselves. We act as a bridge between industry, academia, and the NHS. We're really about driving innovation into practice at scale in the NHS. And on my next slide, I'll highlight 4 principles that we work to. Interestingly, we're funded by NHS England, who have a very much patient safety system savings angle to take on what we do. But we also have funding from the Office of Life Sciences, which is part of BES, which is a sort of an industry part of government. And they're really interested in economic growth, investment, jobs, that sort of thing. And so we try and work in that space where we're driving health improvements, but we're creating vibrant businesses in this region and nationally, businesses who sell to the NHS at scale and export outside this country. And actually, as a country, we are great at innovating. We are as good as anywhere else in the world for new ideas and great ideas and developing them. Where we sometimes struggle is in driving these applications into practice in the NHS. And AI is certainly another challenge in that space. How to get these great data-driven AI type algorithms actually out there in practice, benefiting patients, saving the NHS money, and improving the lives of patients and citizens in our communities. Lots of challenges seem to be emerging in this space. As an AHSN, my 4 sort of buckets of work that I do, it's about really these things that are on your screen now. So it's really about understanding need on the NHS side and on the commercial side, and trying to make those come together in mutually beneficial ways. We do an awful lot of signposting of companies and NHS people into support networks. We are relatively small organizations, and one of our key roles is connecting people and individuals and offers. And I'll talk a little bit about the NHS AI Lab Fund, some of you may be aware of, and give you some indication of how we work in that funding stream as an example of how we work across the patch. One of the things we're really interested in is how things work in the real world. So we're not an organization that does a lot of randomized controlled trials. We want to see how things work after that. So when they're putting in the hands of clinicians and patients, what really happens? The sort of thing we're interested in is new diagnostics. If we send them out to people, how many people will actually open the packet and use the test? Because it can be the most accurate test in the world, but if no one uses it, it's not going to make a difference. And I think that idea of doing real world validation is something that we're very interested in. Once we understand the number of people who will actually open the kit and use the test, that helps the company with the pricing strategy, and it helps the healthcare provider target the people who will be most responsive to that test. And that is the same with digital. We got to think in those terms around digital. You know, how do we get digital and AI-based algorithms to the right people who will get the best out of them? And then finally, as I mentioned before, we're really interested in the spread and adoption of well-evidenced technology that works, technology that's useful, that's usable, and is used. And we're really there to drive the use case for these new technologies and get them into the people's hands who actually need them. And so those are those four guiding sort of tenets, if you want to call them that, are just as applicable in the AI world as they are in any other part of healthcare. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about globally, or well, certainly from a national perspective, about how much money is being constantly poured into digital and digital infrastructure, really, in the UK and England in particular in this case. And digital infrastructure and building data is the fuel that is required to drive the AI algorithms and the AI transformation that we hope to see in the NHS over the next 5 to 10 years. And I'll just point out a couple of programs that we've been really well involved with in this city region, never mind Yorkshire and Humber, but the local healthcare record exemplar program. We were a Wave 1 site in Yorkshire, and that healthcare record was built out of work in Leeds, and there's been lots of additional money has flowed through on the back of that. We're also part of a digital innovation hub. There were 7 of them awarded last year across the UK, £37 million across 7 hubs. There's one of those based in Yorkshire and Humber, looking at cancer data, bringing that all together, and that's available for people to ask interesting and challenging questions of. There's £4.5 million from Health Data Research UK in that hub, and another £3.5 million being invested by industry. We also have an AI and pathology hub in the region, totaling around £50 million worth of investment in that. So that's histopathology imaging, slide images being collected at scale and being available for research. And there's also a radiology network as well for lung cancer, for chest screens, etc. And those images are available for analysis for the right academic or industry-based questions. We also have AI hub funding, up to £250 million over 3 years. So there's masses and masses of, and I'm going to talk about that in a bit more detail. That's more of a national thing that's going on. So there's masses of interest in the centre about funding infrastructure across the country to make some of this possible. And the HSN network is in the middle of a lot of this stuff, connecting people, catalyzing activity, talking to companies large and small, talking to the health system, talking to academics. None of us are experts in AI by any stretch of the imagination, but our role is to try and bring all of these things together and to, if nothing else, identify where the problems and barriers are, and then help everybody concerned get over and get through them. In Yorkshire alone, here's some of the numbers that we've got benefiting our particular region around some of those assets. And you know, that's a lot of investment, and those cash numbers bring high quality jobs to the region as well, both within the NHS, but also with partners from industry who want to work with those systems. So they tick a lot of boxes for us as well. We're also a region that has 2 centres for doctoral training in AI, one in Leeds and one in Sheffield. And so we've got a really highly skilled workforce in the region as well, which is really attractive. And it's not just a skilled workforce in the NHS. There's a plethora of other digital skills and businesses in the region that feed into that ecosystem. Sky Bet have a couple of thousand people working on betting algorithms in the city, and they're moving in and out. Individuals move in and out of those businesses and across, healthcare as well. And that's a really rich workforce, which is a real asset for the region, as well as things like Nexus, and we've got CoSpace North, we've got infrastructure in the region that sort of sits out of the hospitals and the universities where people can do some of this work as well. And why not now for AI? Well, there's always challenges with new innovations and how to take them forward. And you know, all those data sources that I've talked about, how do you connect to them? How do you get your hands on that data? Well, it's not easy. It's not straightforward, that's for sure. It should be more straightforward than it is. And we will eventually move to a system where it becomes much more straightforward to access that data. But who do you talk to? How do you talk to them? What standards do you need to work to get access to some of this data? We would suggest you come and talk to your HSN, and we will signpost you to the appropriate places. That's part of our role. And, you know, some of you may or may not be aware there's a digital charter that was written by the health systems in Yorkshire and Humber that describes some of the broad principles about how they want companies and innovators and academics to work with the health system around data to drive digital and AI-driven innovation. And I think, you know, we recognize there are lots of challenges in this space, but there's that's almost a unique document in the UK, a digital charter that describes some of the broad principles about how you work with a system. That's a really helpful document. And if you haven't seen it, just Google it or come to your HSN and we will signpost it to you. Other challenges for AI? Well, I'm not going to steal David's thunder. He's going to talk in a bit more detail and with a little bit more authority on this later, but there are real challenges about how to test algorithms in the real world, in the real world setting, and to ensure that they don't develop bias and they actually deliver the health benefits and the system savings that we need to see to buy into these things. And pathway change is a real challenge. It always has been in the NHS. It will always remain a challenge. Changing pathways isn't trivial. It's expensive. It's challenging. If it goes wrong, you've got to switch back. So really understanding a pathway that you're going to put an AI algorithm into is really important. Your algorithm may run in secondary care, but it's really interesting and important to understand what impact that might have on primary care or health and social care or a care home, maybe 2 or 3 degrees removed from the point of inflection of your algorithm. So, you know, you really need to if you need help understanding some of that stuff, then come and talk to your HSN and we can help develop relationships that will help you gain that understanding, because you need to convince Savire that what you've got it works, it's clinically effective, it's safe, and it usually has to save some money as well. And, you know, efficacy is different in a way from, does it really deliver on the scale that we want? So as I said earlier, it might be very, very accurate, but is it used in a way that actually brings savings at a system level? Again, David's going to talk a little bit about safety later, but if you can make these arguments successfully, you can happily talk to your potential customers about risk, the risks of not doing something and the risks of doing something, and be able to have proper conversations with potential customers on the NHS side about risk and risk management and risk mitigation. And there are a ton of challenges out there around AI and regulation. I've put a link in here that will take you to the NHS AI Virtual Hub that I think was launched only this week. That's a place, if you're working in AI, I would recommend you drop in on and perhaps join that virtual community. And it's a community where companies will be able to pose questions and seek answers on some of those tricky challenges. Now, I think at the moment it's not quite open for companies. It's open for NHS people, but it will eventually be open for companies to take part in. And I think that's part of what NHSX is trying to do in this space, around trying to open it up, democratize some of the challenges there, and really help inform groups like the MHRA and NICE who are working collaboratively to try and address some of these assurance challenges around how we manage AI in a healthcare system. I want to talk a little bit about the NHSX AI Lab Fund. That's a fund with, I think it's something like 240 million in that fund over the next 3 years. And they've just handed out the first round of funding. Now, as a member of the HSN, I sit on the steering committee for this fund, and I was involved in the very last round of interviews with the applicants as they got through to the last round. And that was the phase 4. And we handed out £37.1 million of funding on a single day after a series of interviews. It was incredibly daunting, but also incredibly impressive to be part of this system, the healthcare system, handing out that level of money, investing that amount of money into commercially driven activity that will benefit patients in the UK. It was fantastic. And the HSN, what were we doing at that table? Well, we have a role at that table just in connecting people. We work with a lot of the companies as they've come up through the different phases of their development, but we also really understand what's going on in the NHS. And one of our roles within that fund was to help them understand almost the AI readiness of some of the trusts that were involved in that in the awards. And so we weren't the judge or anything like that, but we contribute to the conversation because we are able to understand both sides of that coin, the companies on their way up and some of the NHS partners that they work with, and it's often some of the academics that they work with as well. So I think the HSN is in the midst of all this, and we are very keen to be talking to companies who are out there on this journey. Barry, who will be up next, I think is someone who's been on the journey with us, and hopefully we haven't stressed him out too much, but I think it's hard work doing this stuff. It's really, really difficult to build a product and a project that you can take all the way to market and market at scale, but it is possible. And there is help out there in the system, both locally, regionally, and nationally to do so. So my message is talk to us at the AHSN, and we will be able to help as best we can direct you and support you on your journey. And just to say, the Wave 2 call for the NHS AI Lab Fund will be out this side of Christmas, probably early in November, but everything at the minute, it seems to be delayed in that space. Join the virtual hub that's being built. I think, as I said, it will open for companies over the next few weeks, but that's a great source of information, and it'll keep you close to what's going on in NHSX. I think that's probably me for now. I think we'll be sharing the slides, so happy to be contacted outside of this as well. Eleanor, I hope I haven't run over too much.
That's great. Thank you, Nev.
To Barry now, I think. Or take questions, sorry, if people are interested.
We've got nothing on the Q&A. There was just a quick one that occurred to me though, Nev, which you just touched on at the end there, which was about the appetite of different trusts for adopting new technology. So at Hill Dickinson, what we've seen with COVID is it's kind of helped overcome some intransigence that we've previously seen in the system for adopting new technologies. I'm just wondering if that's been your experience as well. Is there a bit more appetite out there to take on these things that overcomes that, I think, almost institutional nervousness that we have in some NHS organisations?
Yes. So I think COVID in many ways has accelerated the adoption of digital technology in the NHS like nothing we've ever seen before. There's been more digital adoption in the last 6 months than there's been in the last 16 years, I suspect. I think the risk equation has changed in organisations. The risk of doing nothing now outweighs the risk of doing something. If we think of waiting lists, elective surgery lists, how to manage people at home and at a distance, we cannot go back to the old way of doing business. So I think that there is an opportunity now where trusts are less risk averse. Having money from a NHS AI Lab Fund also helps immeasurably, because sometimes we have to run parallel systems as we test innovation as they come through. But I think the risk conversation has definitely shifted over the last 6 months at pace. But I think even before that, I think there was a recognition that digital and AI were areas where we have to embrace. I mean, the best example in my mind is pathology. I think we're predicted to lose half the current pathologists to retirement in the UK over the next 5 years, and there's only about 20% of them will be replaced through what's coming through the education system at the minute, as we believe it. So we simply need different ways of doing that work, because there isn't going to be the manpower to do it either nationally or globally. So I think the time is now for some of these opportunities to be taken, and there is obviously funding out there to go for to help you on that journey, which I would encourage you to look at.
Yeah, just briefly on that now, we did get a question on the Q&A about that funding. Who's able to apply for that? Do they have to be connected to the NHS? What's the deal on the eligibility criteria?
It's company-led bidding, but an NHS partner is, I would suggest, it's almost essential to do that. Certainly an academic partner, but certainly an NHS partner is going to be really vital for you to get hold of data and to drive any project forward. So I think, you need an NHS partner to be in with a good chance. Okay.
Thanks, Nev. We'll hand over to Barry.
Thank you, Eleanor. Let's see if I can do the screen share smoothly and seamlessly. Here we go. So I'm not on mute and you can hear me, hopefully. I think that's the quote of the year, isn't it? You're on mute. So I'm Barry Singleton. I'm the Chief Relationship Officer for Scaled Insights. We're an AI startup SME based at Nexus, the University of Leeds' innovation hub. And we were conceived in Toronto, but very much born and operating here out of the Leeds City region. IMC are our parent company, which is a software developer based in Toronto. And we took an investment from Nationwide around about 18 months ago. So Nationwide obviously being the UK's largest mutual. We're interested in and working on the ethical and responsible application of AI to try and solve society's problems. And we did win the Global AI Award at the end of 2018, which was nice. To really try and frame who we are and how we think, and really give you some insight into the story that we told that actually got us into this position and engaging with the likes of Neville and the YHAHSN. Evolutionary psychologists say that when you meet somebody for the first time, you put them into one of four categories. In actual fact, you've probably already decided whether you like me or not. Hopefully you do. Those four categories are like, dislike, total indifference, or a potential mate or partner. And we do this intuitively as humans. We make these decisions about people on an incredibly limited data set. And this is where things like stereotypes come from. So we're a cocktail of behavioral economics, psychology, computer science, and AI. And this kind of thinking informs what we're doing. So take that as a given. I hope you will, that this is how we kind of operate as humans. So in addition to that, we then exchange more data, which is language, and we further categorize people and we make assumptions about their behavior and how they're going to interact with a choice or a decision or something like that. So very quick game. There's two gentlemen who are both demographically identical. They've got property in London. They're in the top 1% of high net worth individuals. They're both male. They've both been married twice. They're both Anglican and they both love dogs. So from a mathematical big data standpoint, they're absolutely identical. The thing is that one of them is Prince Charles and the other one's the Prince of Darkness, Ozzy Osbourne. So I would hope that intuitively, in order to influence one of these towards a behavior or a decision or a choice that's maybe a healthier outcome for them, you can see that Ozzy and Charles are very different people. And in a sense, this is what we're trying to do. We're trying to fix big data's inherent weakness, because big data is the study of people's past actions to try and predict their future actions. And it doesn't necessarily always work. So we're trying to create AI that understands human behavior better, so that we can inform the way that that the healthcare system and education is done. So we focused on four real key areas for our work, and this has been informed by our time with Propel YH, which was the Yorkshire and Humber Academic Health Science Networks accelerator that we were accepted onto. So we're looking at adherence. So adherence, I saw the other day that something like, I think the Facebook groups that are engaging around anti-vax have tripled in the last month. So that's an issue and a worry. You know, how could we potentially provide insights into that kind of problem? We're looking at supporting and identifying vulnerability. And we've done a study that's been funded by Ethicon, where we've done a study, done some quant and qualitative data, collected that data, and then provided those insights with our technology. And we're looking at persuasion, and persuasion could be, how can you influence somebody who isn't taking their medicines to take them, which would have a beneficial impact to their health, but also to the general system at large. And clearly, you know, we're kind of diving headfirst into the issues and challenges around data and ethics, which David's going to allude to, can I cover earlier. I have a problem when I'm talking on my Mac, because sometimes Siri just decides to turn itself on randomly. So I hope that didn't stop my flow. We are massively part of the ecosystem here in Leeds, and it's in absolute thanks to the likes of Neville, Professor David Hogg, and all the people that we're working with at Nexus, which is where our office is based and where I'd ordinarily be speaking to you from. It's an absolutely phenomenal facility, but it's not just the building. So I'm kind of thinking of Dr. Martin Stowe as like the Jurgen Klopp of Leeds, which kind of leaks my football preferences, because the team that he's picked and developed, people like Harrison Evans, the delightful Dutch, Datadoo, Dennis Doctor are all there to help us support and make introductions to the academics and clinicians that we're interested in working with. I could mention Alan, Emma, Sam, and Megan, who are the team that are working behind the scenes doing events as well. So I think the key thing that I've discovered over the last 18 months or so is that actually engaging with the ecosystem is absolutely critical, because it's all about building relationships. We're making AI with a lot of help from our friends. So I've mentioned Propel YH. The team there have helped us to really identify an unmet need that we were able to kind of really contribute to. We've developed a really strong relationship with the Teaching Hospital Trust, and I've got to give thanks to Chris McKee for all his support that he's given us as we've been working up applications for some NIHR funding. We've just submitted one, just got into the deadline, which is a feasibility study that's looking at combining electronic health records with AI-derived behavioural and psychological factors relating to medication adherence, and that's in the context of multiple long-term health conditions. So lots of acronyms. That's something that if you've got no interaction or no clinical experience like I never have, you need to get your head around the acronyms. One of the other projects that we're working on at the moment is with Novo Nordisk. So we've developed an implicit bias test that looks at people's bias towards people with obesity. And in actual fact, as a result of Cambridge Judge Business School executive education, we've also developed some tools around gender and ethnicity as well, which we're about to launch. And finally, one of the other projects we're working on is with Health Education England, which is e-learning for busy healthcare professionals. How can you present them with content that they're going to engage with when they're incredibly busy and are very time conscious? It's not just about Leeds though. So for us, we really are going boldly beyond the Leeds City region. And Neville mentioned before relationships and connections. And actually it's our time on Propel YH that we had the opportunity to present live to NHSX's weekly stand-up. And I can't remember whether I was Matthew Gould's warm-up or he was mine, but it was an really interesting session, and we were really fortunate to be able to do that. The signpost in there is to the Devices for Dignity and Sheffield Teaching Hospital Trust. Again, we've just submitted a funding application with the people there. So with Professor Wendy Tyndale, Vita Lanfranchi and Lee Sprossen, who's really helped us to get our heads around baking PPI. And that's not the insurance for your store card that people are still trying to claim for. It's public patient involvement. And additionally, I think there was a random serendipitous meeting that I had that Neville introduced me to the program manager for the Cardiovascular Medical In Vitro Cooperative, the MIC. And that's led to us working up some projects with King's College London and Guy's and St Thomas. So yeah, Leeds is absolutely fantastic and the ecosystem is brilliant. But as a direct result of us engaging with Propel YH, it's led us to doing some of this interesting work. And I just wanted to kind of really finish off, because I know there's a time limit here, but I did mention PPI before. We've learned it's absolutely critical. And I've got to again thank John Fordham from the YHSN for really coming good at the last moment so that we were able to fill our application in for the funding we went for with them. I think it was Victoria Betton who, after we'd been inducted into the Propel YH program, said, you've got your work cut out. And she really gave me a start warning around the evidence that we would need in order to progress and look at behavioural interventions. And I thank her for that, because I've suffered a lot of hair loss over the last few months. I had a really nice afro maybe 12 months ago, but she helped me to really understand that. And actually, we're talking about data and everybody says data is the new oil. I think it's a bit more like blood, because it's absolutely inside us and we can't live without it. But we really are absolutely committed to looking at the type of projects that we're working on by doing this ethically and with data governance at the heart of what we do. And through working with the likes of Chris McKee at the Teaching Hospital Trust, we've developed our research protocols, which we think actually put us in good stead to meet those criterion. So that's really a whistle-stop tour. I'm very happy to answer any questions. But I just want to say, as well as thanks to Nev and everybody at the Academic Health Science Network, I want to thank all the NHS staff, because we've been having a very difficult time as a family lately. and they've really, you know, we stopped clapping for carers a long time ago, but I think they should be continuously clapped.
Thanks, Barry. I've got a quick question for you, which I think is a variation on a question someone once asked Tony Blair, which was, if you could travel back in time to speak to your younger self at the very kind of outset of your journey, if you could give yourself one bit of advice, and it might be to do with navigating the NHS and regulation, or it might just be a bit of life advice about how to survive it, what would your advice be?
Be prepared to have a lot of patience if you want to work with clinicians and patients. Clinicians are really busy, especially at the current time, and as Nev said, there's been a lot of, you know, this whole kind of digital transformation has meant that that things are changing, but clinicians are still busy, and they're busier than ever, and academics are busy, and they often wear lots of different hats and are involved in lots of different projects. I think patience is absolutely critical if you want to kind of go down this route. You know, we came into Propel YH probably as a bit of an anomaly, and I felt that so we did a lot of 10-minute, 3-minute, 1-minute pitches, but we did them to clinical people and people who are absolutely the heart of solving problems within the NHS. And for me, it gave me a lot of confidence, and it almost pre-validated that we were going down the right route. But it's there is no silver bullet. We didn't go for the NHS AI Fund because I felt it was too soon. We needed to develop that evidence base, and I think that was quite prudent, because we could have probably put a lot of time and energy into that application, and we maybe have you know, put a black mark against ourselves for the future. So I think prudence, patience, and persistence. There you go, the 3 Ps.
Thanks, Barry. We'll hand over now to David.
Okay, thank you. Just share the screen. Okay, hopefully you can see that okay. Right, well, I'm going to focus on explainable AI and bias, which is a particular aspect of introducing AI into medical applications. I'm going to give examples that are both medical and non-medical to illustrate, because many of the issues go well outside the medical domain, right across other domains of potential application. So it's well known that machine learning has really been transformed over the last 5 to 10 years, and I think nowhere more so than in image analysis. And so 10 years, this problem, image classification, has been a problem since the beginning of AI, but the progress recently has been dramatic. And so, you know, showing a deep neural network a cat, and, you know, it comes back and says cat, show it a dog, it comes back and says dog. You know, these systems have just gone from strength to strength. And at the bottom there, I've just reproduced a performance plot from 2013 to 2017 in the main object recognition challenge. And you can see there that the performance basically triples over that very short time period. And that's all down to deep learning. I think back in 2010, earlier years, it was all the precursors to deep learning. The techniques were different, shared some similarities, but deep learning really transformed the levels of performance. But there's, you know, things can go wrong, and these mistakes have been quite highly publicized, and they don't really instill confidence in the reliability of the systems. So, you know, you've got this one here where you have a picture of a panda, and it believes with 58% confidence that this is a panda. You add just a random noise field to it. This epsilon figure here is 0.007 times this noise field. So it's a very, very weak noise field gets added into this picture to give you this picture, virtually indistinguishable. The deep network that had been trained up in this case comes back and says it's a gibbon with 99% performance. You know, this is worrying. Why does it do this? And of course, this wasn't just a random picture. It was chosen in an adversarial way, in the sense that somebody goes out there to try and fool the system deliberately. And there's lots and lots of research on trying to do this with so-called adversarial examples. So we really need to understand this properly in order to convince people that AI is actually reliable enough or robust enough to be able to work in a medical context. Here's another non-medical example. This is actually some work from Leeds, where we're trying to find out who knows who in videos like this, just by watching the way in which people move around. And one can think of lots of potential applications for that kind of technology. So the way it works is you use what's called a social force model that assumes that people move around by virtual forces that kind of exist between the people they know, which draws them together, and the people they don't know that repel them or tend to drive them apart. And if you apply that model and look at that scene, then you can infer something about what's going on. So these purple lines here are pairs of people who have been inferred as being part of the same group. But the problem with this is, with this system, we did quite an extensive ethical study on this system after it was completed. It was funded by the European Union. And one of the things that it was quite clear is that different cultural norms, variations between different cultures would actually give different performance with this system. And so it's, you know, there really are differences between the way people move around and the proximity between people between different parts of the world. So if you want to introduce such systems, you really need to worry about that kind of thing, this bias that's inherent within the system. Unless you do something about it, it's going to be difficult for the people applying it. So we really need systems that are explainable, interpretable. And you know, there's a whole range of reasons for this, actually. I mean, it's not only giving users confidence, as I've been describing, but it's also being able to verify the outputs from a system in a technical sense, a formal sense, safeguarding against bias that I've just mentioned. You may have regulatory standards you've got to conform to. Does your system conform to those standards? With this black box in the system, does it do that? You may be a developer wanting to improve the design of the system. You need to understand something about the way it's working to be able to do that. You want to assess its vulnerabilities, robustness, the risks introduced by the system, and also how do people feel about the system? Does it make them feel as though they're in control of their destiny? And all of these things really drive this need to produce AI systems that are explainable. It's become a very active research topic, as you might imagine. So just this year, I mean, there are loads and loads of workshops on this topic, but here's two. One at the major AI conference, which is being held in January 2021, actually, and one at the International Conference of Machine Learning that was held back in March. So these are workshops devoted to people who are doing research on explainability in AI. So what kinds of solutions are there out there? Well, for many, many years, there's been a solution which is to use models or AI systems that are inherently interpretable. So don't use any of this deep learning stuff. Use systems that are inherently interpretable. So these kind of models, Bayesian networks, causal models, give you systems that can be understood by people. The issue is, you know, the performance levels of a deep learning system can be very high. And so do you really want to throw out the benefits of having fantastic performance just to get a system that is perhaps much simpler, but at least you understand why it's, how it's working in terms of the concepts in the domain. Actually, this approach was used by Tim de Dombel, who was working at the University of Leeds in 1972. And we believe that the system he built at that time, based on this kind of Bayesian analysis, was actually the first AI system in healthcare anywhere in the world. And if you know of an earlier system, please do let me know. Another approach is to decompose the system. So this is work from DeepMind, published a couple of years ago in Nature Medicine. And they have a system that takes an OCT scan obtained from the retina, from a scanner in an eye test, and it maps to a diagnosis of what might be happening in the eye, either normal or some abnormality, and also a referral suggestion. Is this an urgent referral, semi-urgent, etc.? They could have had a mapping, a deep learning mapping directly from here to here. But what they chose to do was to go via a tissue segmentation map in the middle. And a major motivation for that was that this tissue segmentation map actually identifies for every pixel in this image here, what is it? What kind of tissue is it? So you actually get these three-dimensional pictures here where everything is being identified. And the great advantage of that is clinicians can look at this and have confidence that at least this part of the system is actually doing something sensible. And having actually done this bit, you can then imagine that it's a shorter jump to actually producing a classification, because you've gone part of the way in actually finding out what the tissue is. So this idea of decomposing the deep system, the black box, into discrete steps, I think is a very powerful idea in getting trust in the systems that are being built. Visualizing the decision making, been a lot of work on visualizing what these deep networks are doing. This is some work from Berkeley, from a PhD student at Berkeley, and she was looking at the parts of the image that are giving rise to the decision or giving rise to the textual out description of an image. So the aim was to produce textual descriptions of images like this. And she was looking at which parts of the image are most influential in actually bringing about that textual description. So if you look at this here, there's a woman sitting at a desk with a computer. The system comes back and says a man sitting at a desk with a laptop computer. And that's because from all of the training data, the one thing it paid attention to really was the computer here, and that some vague notion that there's a person here, but it doesn't look in detail at the face of the person or anything that indicates the gender. It just assumes from all of the training data it's been given, which mainly in this particular training set has lots of men sitting at computers, that this is a man sitting at a computer. What Lisa and Hendricks did was to modify the system so that it paid much more attention to any people it discovered in the scene in order to get that right. So it comes back with a woman sitting in front of the laptop computer. So there are things you can do, and there's an active computer looking at deep learning, and sorry, there's an active community looking at deep learning, trying to ensure that that bias is eliminated. In this case, gender bias, but of course there are other kinds of bias as well. Another sort of thing you might do is the sort of thing a radiologist would do, which is to generate a textual report. And you know, the great thing about a textual report is you don't just get, as in the DeepMind system, where you just get a diagnosis. In this case, it's there's nothing wrong. But you actually produce a description of what you're seeing. And so the aim here, and there's a whole community trying to do this, the aim here is to generate that textual description by taking lots and lots of textual descriptions that real radiologists have produced and seeing if we can learn how to do it by a computer. So I think that's potentially a very powerful idea. Another sort of idea is to take the black box model, the deep model, and automatically produce an interpretable causal model from it. So produce a Bayesian network from the, or a probabilistic kind of more logical model from the deep learning black box. And that seems to me a very powerful concept. And just want to finish by just having a sort of a longer term aspiration, which is slightly pretentious and kind of steps back from everything I've been saying really. But in my view, you know, if we really want to gain the trust of people in these systems, we actually need systems that have a much deeper and broader understanding of the world that we live in. And, you know, where do we get that understanding? Well, we get it from, you know, playing with our parents, playing with friends, exploring the world. We do lots of reading, we watch television, and we build up a really rich understanding of what it is to be human. And until computers really can share at least some of that, I think we're always going to get anomalous situations arising where the machine apparently hasn't produced the right, doesn't really appreciate the context in which a query is being made of it, whatever that sort of query might be. Okay, thank you, Alan. Thank you.
Thanks, David. I've got a couple of questions which I think I'll throw open to the general Q&A. I just got one particular one for you, David, relates to your talk. I was just interested in your relationship in the health space compared to other sectors. I'm just conscious when we're advising on data protection, use of data in the health sector, often the issue isn't so much your data protection rules, it's the nervousness around using confidential information that's part of patient records and being able to explain what you're doing. And I wonder if that means that maybe we are more nervous in the health sector or more in need of the explanations and the solutions you've been talking about, or are other sectors fighting with the same problems and having to come up with similar solutions?
Yeah. Well, in my experience, I work in the environmental sector as well, so looking at atmospheric modelling and things, and I'm also in the engineering sector. And there are similarities with the engineering sector. It's very easy to download off the internet, design models for various human artifacts, but it's very hard to get hold of design models for things that are commercially, that have commercial value. In the environmental sector, you can download radar images of the UK to predict rainfall, but you'll find it difficult to download something from the, or very often find it difficult to download data from the last 5 minutes, because that commercially is very valuable. So there are sort of issues, but generally speaking, data is much more readily available. There is data available, of course, in the public domain in the medical sector, which has been anonymized and for people to work on in research, but it's much more difficult to come by, and it is a big problem. Getting access to data sets is one of the major problems that we face. It takes a long time. Obviously, you have to go through all the ethical procedures to make sure that the work you want to do is done properly. And but I think it's something that we're finding ways to make it work better. You know, for example, Neville referred to the NPIC project, and you know that's about collecting data, digital pathology data, and putting in place, or starting to put in place, the methodology, the systems that will, the ethical procedures that will enable people to share that data for research purposes in a way that absolutely observes, you know, confidentiality. So that's rather a long answer to the question, but there are differences, but there are also similarities.
Thank you. You've also seamlessly brought us on to the first question for the general Q&A, which is about use of AI to play a role in R&D of debilitating neuro and MSK diseases. So can we use AI to help with the treatment of those kind of diseases? To give fibromyalgia as an example. So I'm conscious that's quite a clinical question. Does any volunteers? Barry's shaking his head.
Well, I mean, I'll come in there on this, not from a clinical perspective, but if there's an unmet need in the system and there are developers interested in that space, then there's almost certainly a role for digital data and AI in it. Now, what are we doing in MSK at the moment that's AI related? Nothing very much that is particularly directed at diagnosis or treating the condition, but we are doing some work currently in Leeds using an AI solution to try and streamline the way the service is delivered in MSK and get people to the right specialists at the right time and the right treatment at the right time. So it's off. It may not just be the disease in particular, but there's a piece of AI there about the service, and that should improve. If the service is run better, it should improve speed to diagnosis, etc. So I think I'm not aware of much going on in that space, particularly around that particular clinical indication. But there are other ways of working in that space that will have knock-on effects, hopefully positively, to things like those individual clinical conditions.
David, did you want to chip in there?
Yes, I mean, I think just generally, a general comment on this. There's lots and lots of, there's a very large research community, AI research community working on a wide range of problems and you know, particular diseases around the world. But that doesn't, that research, or much of that research is still quite a way off actually being applied. And, you know, our job and what we all want to see happen is that more of that research that's actually matured and been shown to work gets into everyday clinical practice. And, you know, that's a huge challenge in itself. And we're all trying to, you know, break that logjam, if you like, you know, and actually make it happen. Very much what Neville was saying at the beginning is, you know, that's really the aspiration, isn't it, to get this fantastic technology being used in a safe way and validated. You know, we have to know it's going to work, just like any clinical trial. You know, you have to know it's going to work.
And in a similar vein, this is quite an apt question given we've just had some local lockdown rules announced in Leeds. What do we think the impact of AI could be on isolation and mental health issues, and how do you expect it to evolve in the future? So the use of AI to try and help with mental health issues or alleviate loneliness and isolation. Any volunteers from the panel?
It's interesting, isn't it? Because I think I saw a study the other day where I think it was with a really small cohort, maybe about 80 people, where they were saying you could predict loneliness from language. So that's kind of veering into the kind of territory that we're involved in, because essentially we're looking at a known measurable outcome, collecting language and trying to find correlations between the two. So that's an interesting, I mean, it seems like that somebody's already kind of going down that route and looking at that. And I suppose if you can better identify vulnerability, loneliness, so that you can intervene and support those people, then, you know, from a non-clinical, non-technical, non-academic background, it seems to me that's potentially, you know, a really good route to go down. But it has the same issues around, you know, you've got to train the machine with enough data in order for it to be validated, as David said, and it's got to be done within the ethical constraints of data governance within the system, so that it's, you know, so that it's done responsibly.
And I mean, there's been a really interesting case recently in the courts about equalities and AI, and this idea that the data sets that you use to teach a system have impacts on, you know, the individuals that the AI is then applied to. So that was about automatic facial recognition, and there were concerns that the database that had been trained on basically made it more likely that you'd be misidentified if you were a woman or not white. So the Court of Appeal decided that actually that was against various equality duties. And I think I can see a similar thing in that sort of, in that space where you're looking at language and how people describe their symptoms. You would expect that people from different backgrounds would describe their symptoms in different ways. And I think there was some research about this actually, about heart disease and how people describe when they're having a stroke, and women use different words to men to describe the pain that they experience. So you've got to make sure that your algorithms being trained on the right data. I've got another question from Myra. So I'm going to just read it word for word because it uses the phrase digital twins, and I must confess not knowing what that means. So any prospects of using digital twins in NHS collaboration projects?
Well, I think if we're interpreting digital twins to be something along the lines of clone data sets, I'm at the edge of my knowledge base here as well. but I certainly think part of NHSX's vision around the AI Lab funding is to use that sort of approach to help people build and validate algorithms as part of taking them forward within that domain. So I think if I've got that right, then I think the answer is yes, but it's being done in the context of NHSX supporting it, and that's probably at the limit of my knowledge of what's going on there.
Yeah, but I think digital twin is quite a broad term, and you know, thinking of sort of models of the human body and the way in which the physiology works can be used in machine learning to generate data that you can actually learn from to try and invert the process going from images, for example, to what's going on inside the body. But then digital twins can be used in outside the body in a much broader sense of, you know, modeling the system inside a hospital, the way in which patient flows work, etc., etc. So you can have that kind of simulation as a digital twin of the real thing, and you can make all sorts of explorations within that and see how your interventions might work. You know, if you've come up with a hypothetical intervention that's going to smooth the flow of something or another, you can see how that actually functions in a hospital context. I think there's lots of applications.
My knowledge is at about the same level as Neville's. I didn't mean to rhyme there, but I know there's a company at Nexus called Slingshot Simulations, and the CEO of the company, David McKee, he's the co-chair of the Digital Twin Consortium.
Yeah.
So it might be worth reaching out to David, because that's his area of expertise. He taught me that simulation is the prediction of the behavior of a thing or a set of things over a given time period. So he knows his stuff. I just remember that. But David McKee from Slingshot is worth reaching out to, or I could make the introduction, because, well, he's normally down the road from us, down the aisle from us at Nexus, but we still talk.
Yeah.
Great. We haven't got any more questions on the Q&A, and we are coming up to the end of our time as well. So I think it just follows to me to sign off. Thank you all for your time, and especially for your questions. Thank you to the panel. I've learned a lot, particularly about digital twins. And yeah, well, I hope to see you all maybe at another one of these Leeds Digital events.
Sorry, I left my presentation up there.